Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Today, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Gabriel Viscogliosi and Hugh Eastman, and today we're having another discussion on aspirational masculinity. Our topic this week is transitions. And maybe first I'm going to turn to Gabriel and Hugh and just tell me, in your mind, when I say the word transitions, what comes to your mind?
The first thing that I would say would be the transition, at least in my life right now, the transition from being an underclassman in high school to an upperclassman. And through that transition, just over the past 3 months, just as summer kind of faded away and school started, I've started to kind of accept more leadership roles in my community and my school. And it's kind of a weird place to be because it was almost like last year in May or in June, and when school was ending, I was a sophomore, and I would always look up to these upperclassmen, juniors and seniors, and obviously all throughout my freshman year. And at this point, it's just become kind of this crazy new transition, something that very new to me in my life. And I would say in a couple of circumstances, one being in just on the soccer field. I think I have played soccer kind of throughout my whole life, but not as competitively as other kids. But this year I earned the title of captain on my soccer team this year after playing soccer for high school for 2 years and kind of looking up to older kids along the way. And I think throughout that transition in terms of aspirational masculinity, I've seen how these younger kids look up to me. And I know that whatever I'm doing, however I'm expressing myself, whether that's being angry on the field or, like we talked about, displaying this socially constructed masculinity and forcing yourself to kind of express anger and not really be yourself, not really be there for other teammates. I've tried to do my best not to do that. And I've tried to display myself as a model for younger kids because I know that's how I looked up to the older kids when I was a freshman and sophomore. And I think I'm working on that. I think I've done a pretty good job, but I would say that that's just one of the experiences I've had in this transition, this kind of fast and new transition throughout my high school life and just in junior year this year.
And I think, just going off what Hugh said, it's definitely much easier to fall into this socially constructed masculinity way since almost June, we were in this lower classman place where we didn't really have these leadership roles and we weren't used to any of this. And then now, just 4 months later, we're kind of thrown into these leadership roles. So it's so much easier to adapt these socially constructed masculinity ideas and kind of fall back onto these ideas and not really think about how you're acting and kind of just go into that safe space instead of really trying to use that extra step and put in that little more effort to really be this aspirational man that can really be a true leader for underclassmen and not be this kind of stern, aggressive, socially constructed man who you think is just so easy to do, but actually take that extra step and realize that's not who you truly are and that's not what your values represent, and really be that aspirational man that you could really be if you put in that little bit more effort with these new leadership positions. And I think, especially in high school, being a leader is such a big opportunity to not just kind of start something or further its goals, but to also show other kids who are younger than you what it means to be a student and what it means to be a real man and not this socially constructed man. And since you're a leader, so many people look up to you. And as a leader, you have a responsibility to really show kids, especially younger kids, what it means to be a man and to guide them on their own values to aspirational masculinity instead of kind of going back onto the socially constructed masculinity.
So I want to dive into that a little bit more because you both have talked quite a bit about leadership with this topic of, transitions. And I completely understand that evolution from an underclassman moving from 10th grade to 11th grade, just by natural progression, you're at a different status or stature level than other members of your high school community. But when it comes to leadership, Hugh, you mentioned being a captain. You both have talked about the importance of modeling. What does that leadership look like to you? What is different? You both mentioned, socially constructed masculinity version versus an aspirational one. Can you dive into what those attributes are from your guys' perspective?
I think especially in these kind of clubs or areas when you're in this team setting or a more smaller setting, when you see these little kids or younger freshmen and sophomores maybe speaking out or having side conversations or really not focusing, you as a leader can really speak out to them and say, hey, stop, like cut it out. That's not what we're here to do. Really focus in and really hone it in. And maybe if they're being negative about someone else on the other team, they made a mistake, you, instead of agreeing with them and saying, yeah, what the heck was that? Like, instead, you have the complete opposite response and you enforce this idea of positivity and uplifting instead of pushing other people down. And especially as a leader, it's crucial to use those small actions and those small things that happen with the small phrases of, oh, what was that? And these negative things and these small actions that seem so small. But when you're a leader, it's so important to take these small actions that start small and end them right there instead of letting them rise up into much bigger things. And then when you're this leader, you have all these big issues that are rising up since you didn't stop them at the root. Now they become and sprung much up and grew so much into massive trees, but you could have stopped them at the roots. And I think that's crucial.
So tell me, what is so important about positivity?
Well,
why do you think that's an important thing to engender? Your example was on a sports field. What is the attribute or what is the outcome from positivity that is a plus?
Well, I'm a strong believer personally, and what you think kind of reflects your actions. And I think putting the right foot forward and really thinking you can do this and thinking you can do well really can help you put that yourself in that mindset for believing in yourself and actually doing well. But if you always have this negative attitude that I know a lot of people can do, that often limits themselves from taking these risks of maybe even branching out into aspirational masculinity by thinking, no, they can't take this risk. Oh no, I'll be laughed at. I'll do this. By always having this negative attitude. But if you take this small switch, I know it can be hard for a lot of people, but really just switching, even starting at the little things and being more positive from that, and then really branching out and really becoming more positive at all, it can completely change your outlook on life. And it's such a massive change, especially for me. I know I used to be a pretty negative person, but I've kind of tried to switch into that more positive person as throughout lots of different things. And I think it's helped me personally achieve a lot of what I've wanted to achieve and also be more confident in myself and also how I can achieve these goals with positivity.
I think also going back to your question earlier about like what does aspirational masculinity look like in all these different settings, I think Gabriel described it pretty well, but I would say one important thing is to look back on your past experiences as you're going through these transitions and kind of apply them or apply the good of those years and what you've seen from leaders in the past to your leadership now. And honestly, don't take everything from people in the past because, sometimes, and as we've seen, obviously throughout society, socially constructed masculinity has continued throughout generations. And I think that there have been good leaders out there, and I've seen, and I really have looked up to many people when I was kind of just last year and 2 years ago. But I think there were in a way, there can be obviously bad leaders or people who are going to continue this. And I think just one way to make sure that you continue in the right direction and continue to spread aspirational masculinity, as we've described, is to look back on past experiences and apply them to how you kind of lead or think about younger kids nowadays.
So I like, what both of you guys have talked about from that positivity perspective. And, I think you said something that I'm going to remember for a bit, Gabriel, when you talk about how thinking leads to actions. What we're talking about really is building the muscle memory of saying, who are we at our core, right? You both have said, self-awareness. Hugh, you talked about that earlier, how self-awareness is really important. And you're talking about, Gabriel, the confidence, and it starts with self-confidence. But both of these words include the word self, which means we need to do a little bit of pause or work to understand, who are we on the inside? Am I inherently a good person? What values, what do I stand for? Where do I draw the line in terms of what I view as acceptable or unacceptable behavior? And what makes people tick? What makes a community, thrive, right? It's by allowing people to be themselves and to bring their whole selves to the table. And this is something, and I'll jump in here a bit because I've got a few years on you guys, and I've been through a couple of more transitions than you have. And I can tell you what I'd love hearing from you guys is that what you're really doing is creating a path for the rest of your lives, right? Because right now we're talking about possibly a club leadership position, a leadership position on a team, all of these transitions you're doing in a relatively safe, confined environment of a school. But what you're really doing, and I love the intentionality of the way that you guys are thinking about this, is you're building a skill set that's going to help you when you go to the next level of education, should you guys choose to do that, and then enter the workplace and then start your own families. These are things that are going to help you with the thousands of transitions in your future life to say, how do I stay my course and true to who I am? And I'm not going to allow outside forces to make me do things that I regret. Because I think a lot of men are stuck in this, confined area where we think, no, as a man, I can only act this way. But that doesn't define us truly. It's what society wants us to be, but doesn't define it. I go back to the story I told you guys about my reaction after hearing Chessie was assaulted. My reactions were rage, revenge, and a feeling of being a failure as a man. And I didn't shed a tear for my daughter at that moment, when that's all I should have been thinking about, because I love her to death and that's all that I really care about. But those manly definitions, those socially constructed definitions, really limited my reaction. And I wish I had had more of these kind of conversations younger, because maybe I wouldn't have had such a limited and negative response. So, thank you for, what you guys mentioned on the transition front. So you've talked about transitions as being a lot of things that you're facing in your life currently as 11th graders in school. Talk to me about some of the challenges you're facing or you're seeing with your friends on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I think first, there's many challenges. I think as I talked about earlier, this kind of leniency or kind of hesitancy about transitioning into this leadership position, since we only had this kind of 4 months difference in between not really being in leadership positions to being in leadership positions, especially in clubs or just as 11th graders in general. We have more responsibility, but I think many kids have, or many of my classmates have had struggles with really taking on this responsibility and realizing how important it is. And I think leadership that is important does not only is not only about kind of being a mentor or helping out younger students, but it can also be about helping other leaders and other leaders become better leaders. And I think that is crucial to being a true leader, is not just only focusing on the people below you, but also focusing on the group right beside you and really helping everyone become a better leader, not just yourself.
I think
And,
also,
and we're using, I'm sorry, Hugh, I just want to step in
no,
and ask a question because we've been using this word leader, and sometimes you can construe that word to mean, because you can have a room full of leaders, right? In sort of a strict definition. Typically, there's, one or a small group of leaders, and then, the concept is you have followers. Are you talking about sort of like a title definition of a leader, or are you talking more about a skill set?
I think at least from what I'm talking about, I'm talking more of that skill set type and more being a mentor for others and really showing these leadership qualities that can be represented in this kind of definition, legal title of leader. But I don't think it's necessarily you have to be this official title of a leader of a club or something to be a true leader and have leadership qualities and be a mentor for other students below and even at the same age.
I think also, and going back to about challenges and how like they've affected these transitions, I think at least from my own experience, obviously transitioning from a sophomore to a junior is a huge thing, and as we talked about, but there are also transitions happening kind of around me as well. And with my sister leaving for college, I've kind of had to, it's been a big adjustment because I've always kind of had her to rely on to, talk about stuff, talk about problems, and her being gone and kind of seeing her only every once in a while it's definitely a big transition for me. And also relating that to leadership, when my sister was at home, it was kind of like she would, I think my younger brother and I would both look up to her, definitely. And I think her being gone, I see my younger brother looking up to me even more. And I think that's been also a bit of an adjustment. And it also transitions around me with him coming to the same high school as me his freshman year. I think I've helped him out. I've had to adjust to being a leader and just even seeing him in school in that way. So I think it's important to also recognize they're all, as you kind of experience these transitions, there are also all of these there's also all of these transitions happening around you. Um, and I think I'm happy for my brother and my sister as well, because I think they adjusted well to their transitions. Um, so I just think it's important to recognize that you're not really the only person in the room because everyone's going through as the years go on, other people get older as well. So yeah, go ahead.
And so I just wanted to pivot this question back to Alex. How do you think, as a dad, you have these small transitions, and what do you think are some of these small transitions that impact you on a day-to-day life, or even bigger transitions that are not as much school related?
I wasn't quite expecting a question back to me, so thank you, Gabriel. That sort of pushes me back on my heels a little bit because the first thing as a dad, first of all, when I think about transitions, I think about my own sort of anxiety and stress. That's what that word brings to me because I'm thinking of my kids and I'm thinking of situations that I can't control, right? They're in the real world facing these transitions from being younger to older, from being, you know, having to go into new social situations, having to face new academic challenges. And, as a parent, you just spend all of this time worrying about how your loved one is treated. And that of by just the definition of saying that, you cannot control how other people treat anyone else. And that to me is very scary because, I think we all have had experiences where we've walked into a room, we feel we don't know anyone. We feel intimidated. We feel small. We feel possibly invisible. We're feeling very self-conscious. And that feeling, I don't know about you guys, but it's one that I really don't like feeling. It's a very uncomfortable, minimizing, lonely feeling that I could understand if I lived with it for more than a couple of minutes. I might have a really tough time functioning and doing things. I find it semi-debilitating. And to think that a young person is going through that. And then I've thought about the many times where I've walked into a room and then one person turns around and makes eye contact with me and maybe smiles. And then even better, walks over and introduces themselves. And it is amazing for how deep and debilitating that feeling can be at the moment. It's just also how unreal it is, because one person giving you that eye contact can make that whole thing dissipate and disappear like it never existed. And I mean, our audience can't see us, but I went from being sort of this hunched-shouldered, closed-up person to that thinking about that one interaction, just opening up everything about me, my aura, my spirit, physically. And that, to me, true leadership, true empathy, true connection. I mean, this is what drives power in my mind. Like, things get done when people connect, when people are open, when people are inviting and not exclusive. Yet, so many of our young people live in universes where your status is by how popular you might be with someone else, another group, what your perceived status is, what type of watch or clothes you're wearing, or how many likes you get on a post. And you think about the people that are watching that, maybe how small they feel, and then again, try to recapture that feeling of how debilitating that can be. We are investing so much time into that kind of world versus the world where we're out there. And Hugh, think about your little brother who's just started, high school. You just mentioned. Think about a world where he has to walk with his head down, being afraid of being noticed because he's afraid of being bullied or ostracized, to one where students come up to him and say, "Hey, welcome to the school. Do you need any help? Can we help you with anything?" And just think about what the demeanor might be, right? And then what his attitude might be when he gets back home, right? He'll probably be eager to say, "Hey, big bro, this is what happened at school today." But if he's there in the hallway where no one's talking to him, he might just walk straight to his room and not want to talk to anyone, right? But that is where I think the vast majority of our young people are existing today. That tug of war between what do I do and what do I say and what kind of person am I allowed to be here? And I don't know if that sort of sounds familiar or resonates with you guys, but it makes me damn angry when I think of young people that have nothing wrong with them, that have done nothing wrong except, exist. And yet they feel like they're lesser than, right? And that is inherently unfair and not right. Yet our whole society seems to be structured on the haves and have-nots. And we have all these isms of go take what you want, you deserve it. No, you don't. Because what you're taking something away from someone to boost yourself up and making someone else feel small. And if we all think about that, someone feeling small could be our beloved little brother, right? Or it could be, your relative's kid, right? Then, you have a much different thought and reaction to it. But love to get your guys' thoughts and reactions to that.
I'd like to kind of highlight the part about how you said, say my brother or no one was saying hi to him in the hallways and kind of walked with his head down. And you kind of see that effect also in when he gets home and just kind of rushes to his room and doesn't say anything. I thought about that as I was hearing that in the broader context of like masculinity and aspirational masculinity. and how you can use aspirational masculinity to, if you're in that situation, to find a solution. And I think kind of walking to your room and not saying anything is really, as much as you might want to do that, that's because that's what you feel like you have to do. It's really the worst thing you can do. I think I, as a brother, if I saw that, I would love to, or I would come up to my brother and I would say, can you tell me about what's happening? Because it's unfair to see people do that or kind of experience that, say, just in school, and then kind of the same thing even at home, and no one's even coming up to him at home. So I think, you know, and even from his perspective, I think knowing or trying to promote and shift our understanding of the world and ideas of masculinity, I think he should also kind of have in the back of his mind, I just want to tell someone about this, I just want to, because it does make you feel so much better about it. I think it just really like, and I've experienced this, obviously, it just kind of lifts a weight off your shoulders. And I think having someone to talk to, or, say from my perspective, I guess as more of a, leader in this transition, coming up to him and saying, what's wrong. I think the effect that that has on the situation is kind of so large, and it will change the situation. Whereas if you keep your head down, and as we've said in the past, kind of this image of armor, if you keep your armor on, you're going to go through it the same way. And I think that being open to facing the challenge is really the direction we should be heading in, because everyone experiences challenges. And I think that it's the way that you handle the challenge that's going to decide what's going to happen to you,
And I think one point that you said, Alex, that I think was a great point was this idea of tug of war, and this kind of internal tug of war that I think everyone experiences, but it might not seem like they're experiencing it. And I'm thinking of this idea of tug of war, of this big tug of war rope. And on one side, it's a heavy weight that's having no effort to push it or pull it, but just holding it down. And on the other side, it's a person trying to pull it. But I think for many people, they try to start pulling this rope and they started at some really big event where it's much harder to start out this kind of aspirational masculinity journey, or trying to use this aspirational masculinity at a very high stage and at some major event in their life when the weight is so high, so they're not able to pull it. Instead, I think it's really important to kind of start at these lower level events and things that happen when this weight is so small on the rope that if you actually try to pull it, you can pull it. So then you practice pulling this weight off at when this weight is lower and when the events have a lower impact. And you're used to now pulling this weight off at this lower impact. But then as you continually build on this, the weight becomes heavier. But since you're used to taking away the lighter weight, now you can adjust to the heavier weight and you can take it away. But if people just start kind of pulling at this idea in their head when they just start at the big weight, they're never going to be able to do it. And that's why I think it's so important to really start from the ground up and really build up from there. And then you'll be able to take away that major weight that you were feeling, instead of slightly battling once every month at this major event and just slightly tugging at it and then quitting. But I think if you really put this effort forward into taking away the small weight in this tug of war rope in the beginning, and then continually building on and adding on, that's what can really spur change and really win this war.
Wow, love it. Because you're really talking about building up that muscle and practicing it. It's the only way to really improve in sports. It's the only way really to improve academically. You don't start with trigonometry, right? You start with basic math and work your way up. So logical and practical, Gabriel, but at the same time, remarkably wise, because it is then the way you presented it. The first thing I thought of was like challenging you guys, right? Because I do believe by the way you guys are articulating this that you get it. And I've been working with you long enough to seeing it in practice now. You know, outside of this podcast, I have the pleasure of spending so many hours with you guys. And, you know, I see so many younger people that could benefit, you know, hopefully benefit from hearing this podcast and getting inspired to aspire to be the best version of themselves, but also with the work that you could do with younger people, whether it's in, you know, your school community now with us, even in the summers, in camps, in sports teams, whatever it might be, but just showing by example to these little about this is what it means to have empathy and to be able to connect with people. And it's really the little things that are powerful and build up, you know, over time and then give you that strength to really feel safe and secure enough to be really who you are and express that rather than following along down a darker path. So that is really inspirational. But do you see, I mean, is it even in your guys' frame of reference to say, hey, I can be part of making a difference? Because depending on the answer, that could influence other people out there listening to the podcast.
I think definitely yes. I think people often have this idea of, oh, it's only big things that matter. But I think this goes back to what I was talking about. No matter how small you think it is, it will have an impact. It's kind of this idea of dropping a stone in a pond, but it has this ripple effect that can have such a dramatic impact to so many people so far away. You might not even realize it now, but it will have an impact. And just doing these small actions you might think are so minuscule and don't really matter, but they actually do. But you really have to consider that every action that you take does have an impact and it does matter. And I think having that mentality in mind, I think that will reinforce this idea of always choosing to have this aspirational masculinity in mind and really pulling away these weights with every action that you do, rather than just waiting for this big action with the massive weight and failing to pull it away, but instead starting low and realizing that it can have an impact at this low level.
And also, like you said before, like in every aspect of your life, you're gonna start out smaller. You know, you're not gonna, like you said, know how to do trigonometry without the basic foundation of, you know, of like arithmetic or basic math. And that's, yeah, it's really just in every aspect of your life. Obviously applies to this because really the change isn't gonna happen by people. It's important to educate yourselves on these topics, but the real change is going to happen when you step in, say, in the locker room in that setting, like we talked about, and people are obviously kind of going a little crazy, getting a little rowdy, and you want to be the person to step in and say, you know, just it's not the right thing that you can't talk about someone like that. You can't talk about girls like that. That's not right. That's not how our society was intended to be, you know? So I think that it's really going to start in those smaller moments because you can listen and learn and kind of display it on a bigger scale. But the effect that has, like Gabriel said, dropping a pebble in a pond, once you kind of step in the locker room and say something, that's going to affect the people listening or just that one person listening to what you said, especially if you're older and considered a leader in that context. And they're going to apply that to how they continue throughout life. So I think, like Gabriel said, just going back, it's going to start with the little things, and that's not different than anything else in your life.
One main point is the little things shouldn't be really considered these little things because often these little actions are in much smaller groups of people, whereas a more intimate setting. So when you really step in and say something, the people that are in this conversation can really hear what you're saying and listen and see why what they're doing was wrong, rather than just kind of trying to step in a very in a large conversation with let's say 30 people, and maybe you'll just be cut out from the noise by the majority of people. But when you really start at this what people think as a smaller level, when it's maybe just 4 or 5 people, 3 people, and you're able to really step in, those the intimate setting of that really allows people to really listen to what you're saying and take away much more, and really then spread that to the larger group. And then when you start out small with this more intimate setting, and then all these people really gain this understanding of what they did was wrong, then when you get to the bigger setting, then it can really stop there.
I think we need to really have a conversation now because listen to you guys. Again, I was just reflecting in my mind about so many times that I've blown managing transitions with my own kids for a lot of different reasons, right? And when I say blow transitions, I mean, we're trying to, for example, get to church and we're running late, and one of the kids just doesn't want to go and is really slow about getting dressed and begins to throw a tantrum. And it's so easy to lose your cool moment saying, just, shape up, get dressed, we're going. And not taking a moment to say possibly, why is this happening? What is going on behind the facade? And I think that happens so many times. It could happen in the locker room when someone is making, a joke for attention. Maybe there's something going on the other side of that, right? Whether it's some confusion, some anger, some sadness, whatever it might be, or difficulty in expressing really what they're feeling. And, so understanding that, and that old saying, you can't judge a book by its cover, what can we do both as parents, from my perspective, and from you as a student, what can we do to make transitions easier? Can you guys think of any examples that have helped formulate who you guys are now and how you think about transitions and how to handle it, whether it be conversations with your parents or with other peers or any other important people in your life?
I think the most important thing is being open to change, because if you're shut off and you're kind of just this stubborn person and you're not adapting to anything new in your life, you're not going to experience those transitions to a full extent. And even just in terms of
But
like,
not every transition. I'm going to push back a little bit.
yeah,
Not transition is a good one, right?
yeah,
And so I think open to change is important, but when you're dealing with a difficult transition, like let's say a
okay,
loss of a parent or loss of a loved one, right?
yeah,
Now, of course, you have to be accepting of that change,
hmm,
but still there's a lot of pain. Like I go back to, our earlier discussion about your sister leaving for college. I mean, there was a lot of emotions built up,
hmm,
with that. And so to me, a lot of it is also just how do you process emotions when a lot of times, especially for our boys and young men, our emotions are not valued, right? They're actually
yeah,
viewed as a sign of weakness. So when you experience your sadness, let's
okay,
say with your sister's departure, what helped you be able to process that transition in a
hmm,
constructive, way for yourself?
okay. Well, I would say the at the start of the transition, kind of the worst thing that I did was I hid it a little because I was kind of denying it. It was really just denial at the start. And I would say I kind of I would look past her room as I walked in the hallway, and I would say, like, just get over it, like, she'll be back soon. And that just kind of, if you think about it, that contradicts aspirational masculinity. That's just, and I would sit in my bed and I'd be thinking about it and I'd get really sad, at least for the first week or two of her not being home. And as I started to adjust to it, because it does in many transitions take time, I kind of talked to my mom and my dad and my brother more about it. And, it was nice to hear that they were experiencing similar things, because similar emotions, especially from, I would say, my parents' perspective, because they've had her, by their side all their lives, and they've seen her grow up and they've seen her transition. So I think knowing that I'm not alone in that transition, or in any transition in general, putting myself out there and expressing how I really feel helped in that, and it just helps in any way of life, because going back to our earlier episode on connections, it's important to know and to connect with people in order to go through life. You can't go through life without connection. So I think that definitely relates to that. I think that expressing how you really feel about something and connecting with other people who might be experiencing the same thing, I think that's important, because there's a certain feeling that everyone feels when they relate to someone else. You have that kind of spark in your mind. You're like, wow, they're really kind of, even if it's just as simple as like, I'm a Jets fan and kind of sad for me, but there's a certain connection just when I see another Jets fan, and just in the simplest context, if I see another Jets fan, someone wearing a Jets hat, we're both experiencing the same, I guess, struggles as a Jets fan, but also we're connected in that way. So I think that,
And it doesn't
um,
feel as bad when you're sharing it with someone else, right?
yeah, exactly. Because, if you're shut off and you're not actually expressing how you feel, you're gonna think that you're the problem, when in most cases you're not. And I think connecting with other people is important for that.
I completely agree with everything you just said, Hugh. And I think also taking not really a different approach, but kind of a different angle. More, let's say you're not really with kind of talking about it as a group, more from an individual perspective. You don't really have to take transitions as this black or white idea. It's not like completely full force into this transition or completely against this transition. I think the way for a transition to be successful is to slowly take it at like as a time and to let it kind of develop and let it happen, but not completely go run into it or completely back out into it, because I think those both of those scenarios are very rushed and can lead to the outcome not being as successful as you wanted. But I think if you slowly try to take it and lean into it, I think that can have a much better outcome for with this transition, no matter what type of transition it is.
My goodness, we've hit time again. And number one, if this were a video podcast, and also if I had a hand mic, I would drop the mic, because you guys just spewed out a lot of wisdom right there. And one thing that I was really struck by, Hugh, and I wrote down notes here in terms of what you just walked through, in terms of the various steps, it was so recognizable to me about the journey that every survivor of sexual violence goes through. First, they want to, deny that anything happened to themselves, right? And just say, just get over it, because no one wants to talk about this. To, you know, a period of self-blame, of why did I put myself into that situation, right? And just get over it. And that magical step you talked about, whether it was your parents reaching out to you or you reaching out to your parents, it showed true vulnerability to put yourself out there, right? And then to realize you're not alone. That is such a key thing for everyone. And that sort of statement of not alone and connection to me was like the real drop the mic moment of, this is what it's all about. And, like you guys have got me motivated now to walk around and start making eye contact with everyone, to say, you're not alone. You might not be a Jets fan. We live in the same city. We are human beings. We love R&B music. Whatever that connector is, you need to put yourself out there to discover what that connection is. For Jets fans, it's easy. You put, the hat on and you have a miserable look. Oh, there's a Jets fan. But we don't know what we're all carrying and also what we have in common, because we all go through difficult things and difficult moments, and we don't need to be alone, and we can be connected with everybody because everyone has value, right? So guys, thank you so much for those lovely messages. And Gabriel, I just love the calmness of your message about don't start big, start small, build it up slowly. It's not difficult. You can do it. And again, here, guys, you guys are showing true leadership in terms of this mindset and the ability to connect with yourselves. Now, the responsibility with that skill set is now, how do we use it? And I think that'll be some of the things we start talking about in future podcasts, about how do we take these things into action to really help the people that need it the most. And then we can be examples for everyone to sort of rally behind. But on that note, that is another episode of Aspire with my fantastic co-hosts, Gabriel and Hugh. Thanks again for such a wonderful discussion. This is Alex Prout signing off, and I hope everyone has a great week, and we look forward to hopefully you joining us next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcasts on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.